to another episode of Tatiana and Angelica Live. I'm Tatiana Morochek.
And I'm Angelica Morochek. And today we're here with Reverend Dr. Terry Troya. Reverend Dr. Terry Troya has been at the helm of Project Hospitality since 1985, first serving as the executive director and is now currently the president and CEO. A minister at Reformed Church in America, she's also the pastor of the Reformed Church of Huguenot Park in Staten Island. Reverend Troya has also served on several city and statewide boards, but there are way too many to mention.
But let me mention a few. Reverend Dr. Troya serves on the board of directors of the Supportive Housing Network of New York, Homeless Services United, and El Centro del Inmigrante. She is a longtime judge of the Women of Achievement by the Staten Island Advance. Welcome, Reverend Dr. Terry Troya. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get a little bit into your history. At the young age of 13, that was the first time when you visited a homeless shelter and where you met Dan Berrigan and Dorothy Day. And you said that they became real mentors to you. So can you tell us a little bit about this, please?
Sure. It was the priest from my church at St. Adalbert's, my home church where I was raised, took me and some of the boys from Monsignor Farrell High School, where he taught religion, to the Catholic Worker on the Lower East Side, St. Joseph House. It was my birthday weekend, and for me, it was an opportunity to hear Father Berrigan. Father Dan Berrigan was a Jesuit priest who was a poet and a wonderful writer with an amazing imagination and a great, fierce love for justice. And he challenged the structures of his day around the Vietnam War, around issues of poverty and racism, and really raised up the question of, what does it mean to worship a God of justice and righteousness and a God of love in structures and in places and in times where people were oppressed and poverty was great and the races were separated. And I was moved by his writing, by his preaching, and by his spiritual presence. It was the first time I heard him that night when he spoke at a small Friday night gathering. It was Dorothy Day who welcomed us at the door and brought us inside. She was a very slight woman and didn't really say much and just welcomed us there. I would later have an opportunity during high school to meet her again on the boardwalk of Atlantic City during a Catholic Charismatic conference. And I listened to her speak, and I went to a workshop she gave. Now she's on her way to sainthood, and there's a ferry boat named after her, and she's a Staten Islander by fame. I look at the shelter that she molded from her own love of God's poor, and I said, I want to do that. I want to be able to welcome homeless people the way she did. I was 13 in that first meeting, and that vision never left me.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Even with the COVID-19 pandemic today, a really hard time. I think religion has always been there to comfort us, and that still resonates with times, and it's a timeless message. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, and you've been carrying out her mission since 1984. Project Hospitality is a powerhouse for giving back to those in need and specifically helping the homelessness. And I've seen it firsthand because, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic, I've been a volunteer for Project Hospitality, and I've seen your work firsthand. And so that leads me to my next question, that I know that since the pandemic began in March of 2020, Project Hospitality has been the only faith-based organization who has kept the doors open of their church shelters in New York City. And that amazed me that all the other houses of worship that host shelters have closed because of pandemic precaution, but Project Hospitality kept its doors open. I've seen you do the first contactless food drive, which I was a volunteer at. So how did you manage this incredible feat?
Well, first, it's not me. It's a whole community of people, volunteers and professional staff, people that have committed their lives to serve homeless people, regardless of the danger or the risk to themselves. And what people don't often grasp is that Staten Island is the only borough in the city of New York that does not have public homeless shelters for street people. we have one small shelter for homeless families that Project Hospitality sponsors called Hospitality House. But the people that live in the parks and the ferry terminal and in the bus station and in abandoned buildings and that sleep in parking lots behind some of our shopping centers and supermarkets, and who live underneath the train trestles and who ride the trains all night, these folks have no place to go except church buildings, church halls, where we open up cots at night and they come in around 9 o'clock at night, they lay their heads down to sleep, they get up at 6 in the morning, and they come back to our homeless center to shower and to get some breakfast. If we had closed those churches, there would have been nowhere for homeless people to go. And homeless people were at deep risk during the pandemic. Diners had closed down. Where do you go to wash your hands? Where do you go to bathe, to change your clothes? You remember in the early days of the pandemic, they said, don't touch a box. If they deliver a box, leave it on your porch for 3 days because the virus is on the cardboard. The virus is on your clothes. The virus is in the air. Mm-hmm. There was no way for people to live healthy on the streets and to live sanitary on the streets. We opened up the shower that we have in the basement of our office so homeless people could come in and shower so that they could at least feel clean and be clean and beyond a sanitizer, be able to wash virus off of their body. And if we had closed, more people would have died on the streets. So it was a life-saving mission to keep those doors open. And the churches, some of those churches were ordered closed by their denominations. And those congregations went back and fought to stay open. We had to deal with insurance companies and church hierarchies and votes on the decision to keep the doors open at the risk of, if people came to church on Sunday and we brought the virus in, were we being a threat? And this is pre-vaccine. Mm-hmm. Were we causing an unhealthy situation in those churches? So we really struggled with that. We did social distancing, we reduced the number of people, but everybody worked to keep the doors open. If the doors had not stayed open, people would not be alive today. We didn't have a choice. There was nowhere else for people to go.
Mm-hmm. And the COVID-19 pandemic was a time of great emotional strife and mental health decline. And 82% of young homeless people have diagnosable mental illness. Why do you think that there's stigma in addressing mental illness in the homeless? And how do you feel about the community's opposition about homeless shelters being built in the community?
Okay. Well, I'm going to break down this question. First, there is stigma in the entire society around issues of mental health mm-hmm. and mental illness. I have seen it in some cultures where it is considered a dishonor, and people are in the back room, and people are not often introduced, and people are isolated because they may struggle with a mental health illness. We see it when people take their own lives because there was no help out there for them and they didn't know how to connect. And in youth in particular, I think, you start out with youth, 82% of homeless youth, the youth that we see, for whatever reason, they are separated from their families and they do not have the support of their families. They are out on the streets. They are fending for themselves. They haven't finished school. When a young person is given up into foster care at 8 or 10 years old, and they walk out of foster care at 18 years old, where are they going to go to get an apartment? How do you have a job at 18 that could afford to pay rent in New York City? They're automatically condemned to homelessness unless there's some structure of support for them. We have a 24-hour drop-in center, and kids are in crisis all the time, and they come out of traumatic situations and trauma, mm-hmm. Trauma in a child's life, that damage and that wound is carried with them. And that's how young people struggle with mental health issues. And without the support of family, many of them end up homeless. And it's just an important fact for us to wrestle with and to acknowledge. The stigma of mental health makes people say, I don't want a homeless shelter in my neighborhood because I don't want those crazy people there. Mm-hmm. But it's not about that. It's about helping people cope with life. And not all homeless people have mental health issues. All of us have mental health issues. Somewhere in our lives we reckon with what we face. In reality, that may be beyond our control. We have situational depression. We struggle with this virus. We had great, great losses in our families and friends and neighbors who died. And that creates the context of mental health need. But for homeless people, we shouldn't be afraid to welcome them into our communities because they are somebody's mother, father, sister, brother, son, or daughter. The people that we serve are Staten Islanders. They come out of our communities. They went to our schools. I remember once, just a couple of years ago, I went into an empty apartment and I found a man about 40-some years of age sleeping on the floor of an empty apartment. And I was talking to him and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said he graduated from Staten Island Academy. He went to an Ivy League college. And things fell apart in college. And his parents supported him after college. Then his parents died. They moved to Florida, and then they both died. And there was no one to support him anymore, to care for him, to engage him, to be family to him. And he ended up sleeping on the floor of an empty apartment. You know, what we do at Project Hospitality is we remind people by our daily work that we are connected to each other. And nothing separates us from each other. Regardless of what our color of skin, or what our background is, what our faith tradition is, what our ethnicity is, what handicaps we bear in life and what burdens we bear, we are related to each other, we are intimately connected, and what happens to one person affects all of us. And that's what makes us stay doing what we're doing, is both to remind people that and to acknowledge that when we come across a homeless person on the street, the person that raps on our window when we stop at a stoplight, the people that we see in the ferry when in the terminal when we move back and forth, or when we see someone in the park or see someone sleeping in a car, they are the least of God's children. They are the least of our brothers and sisters, but they belong to us and we're connected. And if people just grasped that and were willing to look at where the people who have suffered in their own families have come from, it's really hard to say no to providing care for them. And so I find it really hurtful when people say, I don't want a shelter in my neighborhood. I think that comes out of fear and lack of knowledge. But I would take a homeless person over anybody else because they have suffered and they know suffering. And I respect that and I appreciate it and I learn from it.
Thank you for saying that. Very beautifully said. Your passion is so inspiring.
Yeah, like you mentioned, there are not a lot of places for homeless people, specifically on Staten Island, and you responded to that saying that there's a stigma against like the mental health issues that that the homeless could have, and also especially with the coronavirus and about the spread of this viral disease, contact pre-vaccine, it increased the stigma against the homelessness, and Project Hospitality has been there despite all that stigma to help them and to save lives, which you've done, specifically during COVID-19. And it's just remarkable to hear all the work that you've done. And I'd love to hear more about the public health policy aspect of the opening of shelters and about how its significance for Project Hospitality and dealing with homelessness, specifically public health policy, because I'm at Brown University right now and I'm studying public health and human biology. So this is also something that interests me about learning more about the healthcare system and how it deals with homelessness too.
Sure. So I can raise a couple of I think, themes that are related to public health. One is that housing is healthcare. That unless a person is properly housed, that they're warm at night, and that they have nutrition and the ability to eat, to nourish their bodies, they're in a safe place. If they don't have that, it's really hard to take your medication. It's really hard to make your appointments. You know, imagine, and I have seen this, I've seen homeless people dragging their medication in a paper bag on the street, and I once watched a man who was dropping, and he had a lot of medication. He was dropping a pill bottle like every 3 feet, and I was right behind him picking up his pills. You know, and if you don't have any place to put your medicine, how do you care for your health? You know, if you don't have a wall in which to place a clock, how do you know what day, what time you're supposed to be at your appointment? If you don't have a place to put your papers, how do you find your Medicaid card, your identification? And these are all stumbling blocks to people getting health care. You know, I called the clinic on a man who was homeless just last week, and he had a broken hand and a broken elbow. He went to 3 hospitals to get help. And only at the 3rd hospital, I sent him by taxi to Manhattan to Bellevue to get help. Then he was in a lot of pain, and I tried to get him an appointment on a clinic on Staten Island. And you know, they said, if he doesn't have insurance, he has to come in a day early and fill out all these papers. This guy was in pain, you know, and we just never went to the clinic. It just made more sense to take him back to Manhattan. But those are barriers. If you don't have the basics of life, it's very hard to care about your own health, and it's very hard to access the systems of care that are not made for homeless people. So that's a that is a healthcare policy issue. And then the other one, which to me is the most obvious, is that all people should have insurance. You know, no one should be denied care. And I know that I get really good care at the hospitals because people recognize who I am. But everybody should get care by virtue of being a human being. And the fact that we have so many people uninsured is unconscionable. There really needs to be universal single-payer health care. We really need to talk about that. You know, people talk about equity, you know. So the pandemic was the great sword that made sharp the inequities in our healthcare system. People who didn't have insurance died of COVID in the emergency rooms in our hospitals. People who don't have insurance did not necessarily get the monoclonal therapy that many people received that saved their lives. People who were uninsured were not paid attention to. And those are the people that died by the dozens. People who are uninsured come from families of extreme poverty, where 2 and 3 and 4 families live in a 2-bedroom apartment. And when you put the concentration of overcrowded families in one apartment, imagine how the virus spread like wildfire and took multiple family members down from multiple families. That is the inequity in health and the inequity that poverty brings, that all figures into the social determinants of health, from which good public policy on health needs to be drawn. You have to look at the inequities to correct the system and to create the possibility of fullness of life for all persons, regardless of the disease that they're suffering.
Oh, absolutely. And even speaking of lack of attention, it should be highlighted that 92% of homeless mothers had experienced severe physical and/or sexual violence at some point in their lives. What can we do to protect vulnerable women?
Wow. Boy, if I had the answer of how to protect women, we'd be on national television. But it's a very serious thing because young people's lives are shaped by trauma. They're shaped by an inappropriate touch that they don't tell anybody about, but that they carry with them. They're shaped by verbal abuse from a boyfriend or someone else in their lives, and women are particularly vulnerable, and young women are particularly vulnerable, and I think there needs to be both on the side of young women learning how to protect themselves and how to be vigilant and how to not fear or internalize shame when incidents of abuse occur in their lives. And that's really hard. And you also need a place to go. Sometimes you're stuck with the abuser, who might be a parent figure or a boyfriend or someone who's paying your rent or the father of your children. And how do you get out of that situation? You know, that's how women with young children end up in the shelter. They made a decision to go, but they may have lost their job as a result, and they lost their relationship with their family perhaps as a result, and they lost the partner that they thought they could trust as a result of making that decision for the safety of their own lives and the lives of their children. It's really hard. because then you begin with nothing. It's not just about not having an apartment and not having a kitchen and not having food. It's about not having family relation, or it's about not having the person you thought was going to be your partner for the rest of your life. It's about being afraid, and it's a shame factor that is built into our society that tells us how women should behave and what we're not supposed to do. And so it's a really horrible thing. And this world is not made for the protection of women. And that's something that we need to devote our time to and our energy.
Well, it's evident that you are an advocate for sexual assault and sexual violence survivors, LGBTQ rights, helping the homeless, HIV/AIDS advocate. You are a champion of all these different social issues that you are making such a big difference in everybody's lives in all these different areas on Staten Island, and in addition to Project Hospitality. I just wanted to know, what is the hardest part of your job, and what is the best part of your job? This can be in specifically in Project Hospitality, but you can take this any way that you would like.
So I think the hardest part of my job is controlling my rage. When you see something that's really unjust and you don't know how to handle it, how you should address it, do you make an appointment with somebody privately and say, well, I think that's really terrible? Do you shout it out from the mountaintops? Do you put it in the front page of the paper? Do you try to negotiate things to get better behind closed doors? Sometimes I get so angry at injustice I can't speak. I just that's it. And then the best part of the job is being with homeless people, because when people have nothing, then there's nothing to get in the way of themselves and their God. When we have a lot of stuff gets in the way of us having a relationship with God. But I see homeless people and really poor people, they believe in God. They care about each other. The other day, a homeless guy was working with us. This guy, he lives in a little shack. He gets robbed all the time. He was beaten the Thursday before Thanksgiving, and his phone was robbed, and his $60 was robbed from him. But he helped me, and I gave him some money. And then I saw him this weekend, and he said, I don't have a phone, so can you come to my house and wake me up? Now, his house is a little shack, but you can wake me up if you need me. And I said, well, what happened to your phone? I said, I gave you some money. Why didn't you go buy yourself a phone? And he said, I sent that money to my daughter because my granddaughter's sick. So he sent the $60 to his granddaughter when he could have used it for himself. Like the selflessness of people who have such suffering, to think of others like that leaves me speechless. And we can learn from people who live so deeply human lives, even though they have nothing. And that's the best part of my job, is I get to taste that every day. I get to touch that every day.
Yeah, so you're evidently a huge lover of human beings, and I strive to have the compassion that you have towards others. But we also know that you are a huge lover towards animals as well. Upon doing research, we saw that you have a pet tortoise named Harry Houdini. That's a whopping 160 pounds. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Harry was homeless.
Oh.
I found him on the streets of Port Richmond.
Wow.
August of 2011. And he was just walking down the street. I think he might have had a backpack on him. I thought he was a mechanical toy, and I stopped the car to move him out of the way, and he started flailing. He was a meager 10 pounds at the time. And a lady took him in her backyard. I had actually knocked on doors, and this lady's husband had found him out on South Avenue. Someone must have given him up and thought he was a turtle and put him in the wetlands. But he wouldn't have survived in the wetlands because he's not a turtle, he's a tortoise.
Yeah.
And so the lady kept him, but she said he kept getting out of the garage, and he ate a lot of food, and she had 8 kids to feed, and she was like, if you want him, you can have him. So I sort of adopted him. I consider myself his rescue mom. He's really wonderful, and I do I do, when I go home at night, I know this will shock you, but I don't have television, and I'm happy I don't have television. and I talk to my tortoise. I have a turtle in the bathtub. His name is Lucky.
Aw.
I have 2 kittens that were born underneath my porch on October 4th, Feast of St. Francis, so I took them in. I saw that as a sign. And I have a 15-year-old cat that was also found under my porch when it was just a little baby. So I go home and I play with my animals. And I sort of feel like I live like in a barn because tortoises eat a lot of hay. I got hay everywhere in my house.
Aw, yeah.
Well, we have 3 animals. We're a big animal lover households too. We have 2 one-year-olds, Maltesans. They're half Bichon, half Maltese, and 1 tabby cat that we rescued. So that's we love animals here on Staten Island. But on a more serious topic. To our viewers at home that want to get involved with Project Hospitality, how do they get involved? How can they? And what are some upcoming events or dates that our viewers should know about?
So we want everybody to know that you can either go to our website, projecthospitality.org, or go to our Facebook, Project Hospitality, or dial 718-448-1544, extension 177, and leave a message and say, I want to volunteer. We need volunteers. We need people to cook 7 days a week for us. We have a wonderful volunteer that we met from the Eltingville area last year during the pandemic when we were trying to get Christmas gifts for people. Her name is Frances Allegretti. She's from Holy Child Church, and do you know that she went out? She raised $6,000 and bought $6,000 worth of sweatshirts and sweatpants for homeless people.
Wow.
Which is really important because homeless people layer up in the winter when they're living on the streets. So we don't need really tight pants. We need like stuff that's baggy so that they could put stuff on underneath it, you know, and so that they create the layers that give them the warmth they need to survive the night. She raised all that money and bought all these sweatshirts and sweatpants, and yesterday she came by and she dropped off another 60 sets. Wow. You know, so she did our work in the community, and that's the kind of response we need. Project Hospitality is a grassroots organization made up of hundreds of volunteers, close to 1,000 volunteers, and 400 people that work daily as our staff. We need every hand that we can get and every heart to open wide and help us serve the people that God's placed in our way.
We would like to start the lightning round of the show.
So the lightning round, it's really short questions with sweet, simple answers. It's either yes or no or very short, open-ended. It's just a chance for the viewers to get to know you on a more casual level. So tea or coffee in the morning?
Coffee if I'm well, tea if I'm sick.
Winter, spring, summer, or fall?
Fall, always fall.
In-person board meetings or online Zoom meetings?
Online Zoom meetings forever.
Fruit or vegetables?
Fruit.
What is the last book that you've read?
Watch for the light.
Upstate cabin or Jersey Shore?
Cabin.
Nice. Okay, so this concludes this episode of Tatiana Angelica Live. Thank you for joining us today, Reverend Dr. Troya. It's been a pleasure.
Same here.
It's remarkable to hear about your work, and you inspire me, and I hope you inspire the viewers to get involved with Project Hospitality. If you with the new year, I really want to get out and help the community more. You really are an inspiration to me, and I really hope that the viewers can become involved, because what Dr. Reverend Troya does is just really remarkable. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you for inviting me and for being a part of the work of Project Hospitality.
Thank you. If you would like to get involved and learn more about how you can help the efforts of Project Hospitality, please visit projecthospitality.org. Thank you.